and welcome back to Simple Physiology for High School students. This is Dave, and I'll be your teacher for Module 9, where we take a look at the kidneys. Now, we probably have some idea that the kidneys make urine, or make pee, and that's true. We're going to take a little closer look at how that happens, and what the contents of the pee are, and where things come from in the body. So, with that out of the way, let's take a look at where the kidneys are located. And we see they're located about halfway down the body, a little bit toward the back. You got two of them. You can do with one, but you can't do with none. You got to have at least one. So the kidneys basically, as you probably learned somewhere along the line, filter the blood and take out certain particles or certain substances that need to be put into the urine, and that is true. But the kidneys also do other things, and we're going to take a look at that in a few minutes. So what we see here is the left kidney and the right kidney, and notice we have tubes. This tube here going down here, and this tube over here going down here. These are ureters, and what they do is once the urine is made in the kidney, the urine flows down the ureters into the bladder. And of course the bladder is where the urine is stored until you're ready to pee it out. So that's the basic organs that we find in what's called the urinary system, because it makes urine, of course. All right. We take a little closer look here, and we see left kidney, right kidney. Now here's some major blood vessels, and guess what? We have talked about these blood vessels before. This big red one is the descending aorta, sometimes called the abdominal aorta, and it of course is coming down from the heart. And one of the many branches that go off from the abdominal aorta is a artery that goes out to each of the kidneys, and this is called the renal artery, and I'll show you that in just a minute here, how that's spelled. Once the blood has flowed through the kidney and needs to go back into the body, it'll go back into what is called the inferior vena cava. You recall we learned about that in the heart module. And once the blood is back in the inferior vena cava, it flows up to the heart again. So these are very large blood vessels, and they're about 1 inch in diameter, and each of them the artery delivers blood to the kidneys, and when the blood is finished, it returns to the heart via the inferior vena cava. For the spelling of those, let's take a look here. Renal, of course, is anything related to the kidney, and we have renal arteries coming off the descending aorta, and the renal vein hooking up back into the inferior vena cava for the trip back to the heart. Okay, so let's take a little closer look at something about the kidneys. They're each about 4.5 inches long, about 12 centimeters. About 180 liters of filtrate flow through the kidneys per day. Now this is not blood, and I'll show you what the difference is in a minute. It's called filtrate. It's sort of blood plasma, but you can see it's a huge amount that flows through the kidneys. But out of that 180 liters of filtrate, only 1.5 liters of urine is produced per day on the average. So a lot of, I guess we would call it plasma, flows through the kidneys, but only a fairly small part of it becomes urine. Okay. So with that, let's look at some of the functions of the kidney, because the kidney is quite complex. It has quite a few things that it does, and we're not going to have time in this course to go over everything. Plus, there's quite a bit of chemistry, and this course is designed for 9th and 10th graders before they've had very much chemistry. So one of the functions, of course, is to uh, remove body fluids. Uh, and of course, water would be the major body fluid that would be uh, taken away or released. This has an effect on the blood pressure, as we will see in a few minutes. So the blood pressure is one of the things that is regulated. We mentioned before that the blood and the body fluids have to keep a certain acidity in the body, and that acidity is 7.4 on a 14-point scale. We don't have time to go into it today, but this is just slightly toward alkaline on an acid continuum. And it is very important that the acidity be kept at this point for chemical reactions to happen very well. So the kidneys regulate the blood acidity. Let's see what else. They also maintain the electrolytes. These are the chemicals like potassium, magnesium, calcium, and so on that help to keep electrical balance in the cells and also help in ways to keep the water balance. So these have to be kept regulated and maintained. And the kidneys do those. Oh, here are some examples. Sodium, chloride, potassium, calcium, and magnesium are all maintained through the kidneys. The kidneys also have to get rid of waste products made by the body cells, and these are primarily urea and uric acid. All right, these are nitrogen-containing compounds from a breakdown of proteins, and they must be gotten rid of in the urine. Okay. We'll also see that hormones are produced by the kidneys, which promote the production of red blood cells, which is very important, and also which converts vitamin D to a active state so it can be used by the body. So as you can see, the kidneys do a lot. The working unit of the kidney is called the nephron, and we're going to take a close look at it in just a minute. The nephron is the filtering unit of the kidney, and there are about 1 million of these nephrons in each kidney. So guess what? They are microscopic, right? We need a microscope to see them well. If we take a look at a side view of the kidney, like this, we'll see that these filtering units are located partly in the outer part of the kidney and partly on the inner side of the kidney. And we'll see that a little bit more in a few minutes. Here you can see nephrons. They're colored in yellow. And we're going to get a closer look. Oh, here's a very good shot of the renal artery coming into this kidney. And here's a renal vein taking blood out of the kidney after it's been filtered. Here's a closer shot of an actual nephron. It's kind of a filtering tube that winds around and goes down in a loop, then comes back and winds around some more. And then whatever is left becomes urine, and it goes down this tube right here, down to the ureter, and then down to the bladder. Okay? Here's a little magnification of the picture we just took a look at. Here's the filtering unit. Here's the loop that goes down, comes back, loops around some more, and then becomes urine at this point and goes down into the collecting duct into the bladder, ureter, and then the bladder. Now, let's take an even closer look at what is called the nephron. Some people call it the yellow brick road. If you're a fan of The Wizard of Oz, that's fine. So here we have blood coming from the renal artery, and it enters this capsule right here. Capsule, think of it as a drinking cup, okay? And the blood comes in, and the part of the blood that does not enter the yellow brick road are red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Those are all diverted back into the regular bloodstream, and they immediately go back into the circulation. What does go into the nephron is plasma, blood plasma, okay? So here the plasma starts entering, and it goes around these various tubes right here. This is called the near tube, and this is called the loop, and then this is called the far tube. So we have a near tube, a loop, and a far tube. And finally, when the plasma gets over to this point, it becomes urine, and this is the collecting duct that goes down to the ureter, which takes it down to the bladder. Now, what happens as the plasma courses along here is that certain things that need to stay in the plasma, like urea and uric acid, stay in. But certain things that have gotten into the plasma, which need to be replaced by absorbed by the body, that happens also. And so any glucose, for example, that enters, any proteins that enter, those are reabsorbed back into the blood vessels, which I'll show you in a few minutes, and do not continue on the yellow brick road. The things that to continue on the yellow brick road are, like I said, waste products of cells, and also substances that the body has too much of that need to get rid of. Like if you go to a movie and you eat a lot of salty popcorn, then the body needs to get rid of some of that salt. It's too much. And you'll find salt in the urine here. Okay? Right. So, just had a dog come into the house here, so that's what the noise was. All right. Let's take a little closer look at the neuron in the next picture here. Not neuron, nephron, excuse me. Here again we see blood coming in from the renal artery, entering the capsule, all right? And then red blood cells and white blood cells are diverted back to the circulation. Plasma enters the yellow brick road, otherwise known as the nephron, and it continues along. Now, notice the capillary network here. This is a network that surrounds each of the nephrons, and this is something substances can be reabsorbed back into the bloodstream if we do not want them to become urine. And again, these would be things like glucose, proteins, water, things the body needs to reclaim. Anything that stays in the yellow tube will become urine. This is the final picture we will take a look at as the nephron. You can see the tube, the yellow tube, and by the way, it's not yellow, it's only yellow in the picture, surrounded by capillaries so that substances can be reclaimed back into the bloodstream that we don't want to lose in the urine. This red and blue looks like there's an exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, but that's not true. There's simply, there's simply an exchange of going from one part, from an arterial part to a venous part, so that the blood can return to the body. Okay, there's really no exchange of oxygen and CO2 there. Again, finally, when the yellow brick road gets to the end here, everything which has been collected is now urine. Obviously, it's quite watery, and it will continue down the collecting duct to become, to be peed out. Okay, good. These are the parts of the nephron. They have fancier names, and I'm kind of reluctant to bring those up at this time, but try to think of these as starting in the capsule, going through the close tube or the near tube, going down the loop, going into the far tube, and then finally entering the collecting duct where the filtrate has now become urine and it will continue to go out of the body. Okay? These, to remind you, are the things that tend to be reabsorbed by the body in the nephron. Definitely glucose. You do not want sugar to be peed out because you need it for your metabolism. Any amino acids will be reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. Water, it all depends on what's going on with you. Sometimes water is reabsorbed and sometimes it's not. Depends on your level of hydration. And finally, sodium usually is brought back into the body because, remember, the body has to maintain a sodium content of 0.9% at all times. If there's too much salt, you'll pee it out. If there's not enough salt, you'll bring it, sodium, you'll bring it back in. Okay? I want to talk a little bit about the kidneys' control or regulation of blood pressure. And for that, we're going to return to this picture that we saw in Module 1, where we said, where is the water in the body? Because the water is what makes the blood pressure. As you recall, we have a blood vessel here. We have body cells lining the blood vessel. And we have between the cells here. And the topic of this picture was, where is the water in the body? And we find water inside the cells, we find water between the cells, and we find water in the bloodstream. All right? Now, what makes blood pressure in the bloodstream? It's the force of the blood pushing out on the inside walls of the blood vessel. But what causes that force? Well, one of the things, the major things that cause that, is more water entering the bloodstream. Think of it as blowing up a balloon. If you have a balloon that's not full of air, it's just kind of saggy, right? But if you blow air in, the pressure increases. Here, if water from between the cells is pulled into the bloodstream, then the blood pressure is going to go up, all right? And just the opposite, if water leaves the blood vessel and goes into the in between water, the blood pressure will go down. So the kidneys actually regulate this to a great extent by either keeping water in the body or letting it go out in the pee, okay? So I'm going to introduce you to some new words that we haven't come across yet that I think you need to know, all right? Well, I'm going to keep this picture right here just for one more time here. All right, we're going to call the water that's inside the cells intracellular fluid. That's not too hard. And the water between the cells, we're going to call extracellular fluid. Intracellular, extracellular fluid, okay? And let me show you how that's spelled. Intracellular fluid, we abbreviate ICF. Scientists use these terms all the time, ICF. And the water between the cells, we're going to call extracellular fluid, or ECF. Okay? Now, let's get back to our picture that can explain a little bit about blood pressure and the kidneys. Okay? Starting over here, we can see that water enters the body by drinking. So it goes first to the stomach and then the small intestine. From each of those organs, it is absorbed directly into the bloodstream. So anytime that you drink water, especially a large amount of water, your bloodstream is the first to absorb it, and your blood pressure is going to go up. Why? Because your blood, because the amount of blood plasma has gone up. Okay, the blood volume. As the blood volume goes up, your blood pressure goes up. Now, once the water is in the bloodstream, it can go into the ECF or back into the bloodstream. It can go from the ECF into the ICF. Okay, remember ICF and ECF, intracellular and extracellular fluid. The water is free to move into a cell, out of a cell, into the bloodstream, out of the bloodstream, and so on. So, to summarize, if there's more water in the bloodstream, the blood pressure is going to go up. Now, what can help control that is the kidneys. First of all, notice I've got sweat here off to the side, and I've got a question mark. Why do you think there's a question mark there? It's because what you're doing can affect how much water you're losing by sweat. If you're in a cold environment, you're not going to sweat hardly at all, and you're not going to be losing any water that way. But if you're in a desert or hot environment, you're going to be sweating a lot, and a lot of water is going to be lost by sweat. First from the blood vessels, bloodstream, then from the ECF, and finally from the ICF. So this is kind of a toss-up about what the person is doing. Now let's get down here to the kidneys, because here's the bloodstream entering the kidneys, right? Here are the two kidneys. Here are the two ureters leading down to the bladder. And here you pee out the urine, right? Remember, urine is made mostly of water, about 95% water. So when the plasma filtrate flows through the kidneys have to decide how much water needs to be taken out. Should water be returned to the bloodstream, or should it be made into urine? And that's a decision that kidneys make every day in determining how much water to take out and how much to leave in the body. Okay? So the kidneys definitely have an effect on the blood pressure by either taking water out of the blood, which reduces the blood volume, reducing the blood pressure, or leaving water in the bloodstream, which increases the blood volume, thus increasing the blood pressure. Okay? All right. One of the things the kidneys have to decide at all times is how crowded things are in the body fluids. Look up here. Here we have a container of particles in water, and we can see that there's a lot of particles in this particular area. We can use the word dense to say how many particles are in this particular area. Another word that physiologists use is called concentrated. We can say the particles in this area are very concentrated. Okay? Now let's look at the opposite. Very few particles here in the same space, and the word is dilute. If we look at this group of particles in this watery mixture, we say that it is dilute. What the kidneys want to do is get it just right, not too dilute and not too concentrated. Want to be just right, and this is what the kidneys determine every day. Okay? Something very interesting that I always thought had a practical value was there's something called obligatory water loss, which means that every day your kidneys must make at least 400 ml worth of water in the urine. All right, that's a little bit less than half a liter. Why this minimum amount of water in the urine? Because the urine contains solids, all right, and those solids, you can't pee out solids, right? You got to mix those with water. And the minimum amount of water that the kidneys need to make in order to get rid of those solids is 400 ml. So this is called you're obligated to make 400 ml of water every day and pee that water out. Okay. Now here's a practical situation that's kind of interesting here. Let's say that there's an earthquake, all right, and some little kid gets stuck under a whole bunch of rubble in the earthquake, okay? Now, and the rescue crews can't get to him. And he's there for, say, 5 days, all right, without water, all right? They can't get to him under the earthquake. Well, let's not say a kid. Let's say a man. This man is going to pee 400 ml of urine every day, regardless of whether he's drinking or not, because he has to get rid of his cellular waste. So in 5 days, 5 times 400, this man will lose 2 liters of water just by being under the rubble and not being able to be rescued. All right. So he goes into extreme dehydration simply because he has to pee out this water, and he's not replacing it with any drinking water because he can't reach it. Okay. So interesting stuff to know. Lastly, we're going to take a look at the contents of urine. I've sort of referred to this before, but we'll take a look at it in a little bit greater detail now. Urea and uric acid, again, are both byproducts of cellular metabolism. These are sort of poisons, toxins. They must be gotten rid of, and the only way to get rid of them is through the urine, okay? Salt is made of sodium chloride, so the sodium part of your of the salt needs to be gotten rid of if you've got too much in your system, because you have to keep that 0.9% salt amount. You'll probably find hormones in your urine, depending on what's happening. Kind of an interesting sideline here. You know, women can detect if they're pregnant by dipping a little stick into their urine and seeing if there's a chemical change. Guess what the little stick is showing? Is whether a particular hormone is in the urine. If that hormone is in the urine, that woman is pregnant, okay? And there's likely to be many other hormones in the urine also. Various electrolytes or minerals containing nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium are likely to be found in the urine. Now, what is not to be found in the urine? We do not want to see sugar in the urine, because that means glucose is not being used by the cells. It's just being put back into the bloodstream. And this could be diabetes, so you do not want to see sugar in your urine. You do not also want to see blood in your urine. This means there's bleeding going on somewhere in the kidneys or the ureters or the bladder. Somewhere you're bleeding, and that has to be investigated and found out. So I hope that you've enjoyed this brief look at the kidneys. They're far more complicated than I have shown here, but when you take a more advanced physiology course, that teacher will cover those more advanced topics. In the meantime, this is Dave, thanking you for being with us today, and goodbye.